Caught my ex using my $30,000 savings. He said, "You'll never prove it." I turned the tables, his confession was epic. I'm 35, and I've spent over a decade working my tail off as a high school teacher. I don't make much, but I managed to save $30,000. That money was supposed to be for my dream home, a small, quiet place just for me. I've been renting the same tiny apartment in Pennsylvania for years, and I've put in all the extra hours and pinched every penny to get that savings where it was. Then I met Vince. Vince walked into my life with a smile and confidence that instantly hooked me. He was charming, funny, and seemed like the perfect guy for someone like me, someone who'd spent most of her life working, not dating. He'd come into the bar where I sometimes went with friends after a long week, and before I knew it, we were chatting. He had a magnetic personality, a way of making me laugh, and even a bit of that bad boy edge I never went for before. We quickly started seeing each other. It wasn't long before he started spending nights at my place. He'd talk about his big plans and dream projects, making him sound like someone ambitious who just needed a break. Vince said he was between jobs, trying to make ends meet but struggling. I felt for him. I thought everyone deserves a chance. He'd always pay for our drinks or dinners when we went out, even if he joked that he was living off his last dime. He had this way of making me feel like we were partners, in it together, fighting the tough life. But looking back, the red flags were everywhere. A few months into dating, Vince started borrowing money from me. It started small. He'd ask for $20 for gas or $40 to help with his phone bill. He'd give me all kinds of reasons. He was waiting on some money to come through, or he was between gigs, or he had this big opportunity coming. I trusted him, so I loaned him the money. He promised to pay me back as soon as he could, but of course, that day never came. I brushed it off because it wasn't worth a fight, and I believed he was good for it. Then came the big request. One night, he came home looking exhausted, saying his car had broken down on the side of the road. He needed $1,500 to get it fixed. He said it was an emergency, that he needed his car for job interviews, and that without it, he couldn't make money to pay me back or even pay his rent. My gut told me to say no, but I caved. I handed over $1,500, telling myself it was just temporary. I figured we were in a relationship, and sometimes that means helping each other out. A week later, I checked my bank account, and my stomach dropped. My $30,000 account had a big, ugly withdrawal. $10,000 was gone, almost 1/3 of everything I'd saved for years. Panic set in. I felt dizzy, shaky. I kept looking at the number, hoping it was some horrible mistake. I called the bank, trying to keep my voice steady, and after a long hold and a lot of back and forth, they confirmed that the money had been withdrawn online. I never used online banking for that account, it was my nest egg, something I barely touched. But Vince, he knew how to handle tech stuff. He was always fixing my laptop or setting up gadgets for me. And he'd had access to my computer, passwords, everything. The pieces started coming together. Vince had been alone in my apartment dozens of times. He'd seen me enter my passwords, used my laptop. I felt like a fool, but I knew what had happened. I needed to hear it from him. That night, when he came back from wherever he'd been, I confronted him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. I just looked at him and asked him, "Did you take $10,000 from my savings account?" He smirked. That stupid, smug smirk. He leaned back, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Why would I need your money? You think I'm dumb enough to leave a trail? You'll never prove it was me." I was speechless. His arrogance was like a slap in the face. He didn't care at all, not about me, not about the money, not about what he'd done. I could feel the tears welling up, but I refused to cry in front of him. Instead, I just stared at him, nodded, and told him to leave. I couldn't even look at him. That night, I went to a friend's place to stay, too angry and hurt to sleep, but determined to find a way to make him pay. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew he wasn't getting away with this. I spent the entire night awake, plotting my next move. The next day, I took a day off work and went to see a lawyer. I explained everything, the money, the withdrawals, Vince's attitude, and the fact that I was sure he'd accessed my account from my own computer. The lawyer was sympathetic but explained that proving it was Vince would be difficult. With no hard evidence that he'd been the one to make the withdrawal, it would be a tough case. That's when I realized I'd need proof. Real proof. I started by pretending to forgive him. I went back to the apartment that night and told Vince I was sorry for accusing him. I told him I overreacted and didn't mean to push him away. He took the bait without a second thought. He acted like I'd finally come to my senses, laughing it off like I was the crazy one. For the next few weeks, I acted as if everything was normal. I was friendly, even sweet, playing the doting girlfriend. All the while, I was setting him up. While he was out one day, I installed a small, hidden camera in the living room, aiming it right at the computer desk. It wasn't exactly legal, but at this point, I was desperate. I figured he'd eventually slip up, and if he did, I'd have it on video. To bait him even more, I started leaving my purse out in plain sight with cash sticking out, little traps that he fell into every time. It didn't take long for him to help himself to whatever he wanted. Then, I set up the final trap. I made a fake email that looked like it was from my bank, saying they detected unauthorized activity on my account and that an investigation was underway. I made sure he saw it open on my laptop screen, and then I left the apartment for the day, giving him plenty of time to sit there, stewing. I was hoping it would make him nervous enough to talk. I was hoping it would force him into admitting something. When I got back that night, he looked nervous. As we sat down to talk, he finally cracked. He started rambling about how he only took the money because he was desperate and didn't mean any harm. He blamed it on the stress of being unemployed, on bad luck, and even had the nerve to say he'd never do it again. As Vince rambled, trying to justify why he took my money, I just sat there, nodding along like I understood. Inside, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I knew his confession was being recorded on the hidden camera, every word, every excuse, his pitiful attempt at making me feel guilty for even asking. He thought he was off the hook, but I had him right where I wanted him. The next morning, I took that footage to my lawyer. We watched it together, Vince's confession, his smug face as he admitted to taking my savings. My lawyer couldn't believe it. He told me that this kind of evidence was rare in cases like this. I had him talking about how he'd done it, even down to his so-called reasons. It was solid proof, exactly what I needed to get my money back. But I wasn't stopping there. We filed a police report, attaching a copy of the video as evidence. With that kind of admission, they didn't waste time. Within days, they had Vince in for questioning, and while he tried to squirm his way out, there was no escaping that video. He was charged with theft and fraud. Seeing him squirm, knowing he finally had to face the consequences, it was satisfying in a way I can hardly describe. For once, his charm and arrogance couldn't save him. But I still wasn't done. My lawyer advised I could take him to civil court as well to get back every single dollar he'd stolen, along with damages. I didn't hesitate. We filed a civil lawsuit, and Vince was ordered to pay me back not only the $10,000 he'd stolen but also the other money he'd borrowed over the months, plus damages for emotional distress. In total, he owed me close to $35,000. He tried to drag out the payments, claiming he didn't have the money, but with a court order in hand, I wasn't letting up. My lawyer set up a system where his wages were garnished, meaning every paycheck he made would have a big chunk taken out and sent straight to me. He couldn't dodge it, couldn't delay it. His nice guy act, his sweet talk, it all crumbled. With every paycheck he lost to me, he was paying for all the trust he'd broken, every lie he'd told. And in a way, that was even better than getting the money back all at once. He was forced to work, to see his hard-earned cash go straight to me, month after month, paycheck after paycheck. In the end, I got back every dollar he took, and then some. I used that money to finally get my dream home, a small, cozy place where I could start fresh. The best part? It was fully paid off. No mortgage, no worries, just my own little sanctuary, free from him and his lies. As for Vince? Last I heard, he was couch surfing, still in debt, still struggling, and most likely still looking for someone else to take advantage of. But this time, he'd lost his charm, lost his act. He was just another guy with a record and a debt he'd be paying off for years. And for me? I got my revenge. A sweet, steady, satisfying revenge, one paycheck at a time.